Thanks for the opportunity to come along today and provide a bit of an update on some of the issues, hopefully of interest to rural and regional councils that Local Government Victoria, being the department that obviously is responsible for local government across the state, is currently involved with. Some of these are of a large scale, some are of a much smaller scale. I will, with your indulgence, zip through much of this pretty quickly because I'm very happy to leave enough space at the end for questions for things that might be particularly on your mind. I do want to spend a little bit of time now on the talking about the Local Government Act reviews. So hopefully most of you will be aware that we are getting towards the final stages of a what will turn out to be a 4-year program of comprehensively reviewing and shaping the way the system of local government in Victoria looks, feels and operates for the next generation. So it's been a very, very significant piece of work, started in 2015 with the release of a discussion paper. We sought submissions, and many councils, and particularly many rural councils, participated by giving their ideas about how they think the system should look in the future at that time. The government then produced a directions paper in 2016. There was about 330 submissions to that directions paper. It foreshadowed over 150 different reforms to the way the system works today. And then, of course, in December last year, the government released the what's called the Local Government Exposure Draft Bill. So the Exposure Draft Bill is essentially a draft of the legislation that would be intended to be taken to Parliament. So we've invited submissions. We in fact extended the timeline for submissions to the draft bill out to the 16th of March, primarily on the back of feedback from councils that they needed a little bit more time given the significance of the work. So we've got about 190 submissions to the draft bill, and I have to say the sector has been incredibly generous in their contributions to some proposed further refinements to the bill, and we're really working at some level of detail now to look at all 190 submissions to see what recommendations may be provided to the government to take the final bill forward to Parliament. It is worth highlighting that there were some quite fundamental changes made between the directions paper and the actual bill, and hopefully these will have come to your attention already. Probably the most contentious of all the issues was the issue of the role of the Mayor, and there were some quite fundamental changes proposed to strengthen the leadership capacity and functioning of the role of Mayor. Some of those, however, in the bill have been watered back. So you will now see that the bill provides for mayoral terms to be either 1 year or 2 years. It was originally proposed that all mayoral terms would be 2 years. The only exception to that, of course, is Geelong, who have their own separate legislation at the moment, provides for a 2-year mayor, and for Melbourne, where the mayor is popularly elected. There was originally a proposition to allow the mayor to be directly elected, so similar to the Melbourne model. There was a lot of opposition to that came through the original submissions, and that particular component or proposition does not now appear in the bill. The Audit and Risk Committee, it was originally intended that there be a much larger range of responsibilities given to the Risk and Audit Committee to fulfil a compliance function, but they've now, based again on submissions, those responsibilities have very much been scaled back. There's no changes proposed to the electoral franchise. So the franchise that you see today, which is both residentially based but also property ownership based, that it's intended through the bill that would also continue. It was originally intended that there'd be quite fundamental changes to that. The original proposition was to allow the number of council laws to go out to 15. That's now been brought back to 12. So that's now status quo. The range of councillor numbers is proposed to remain at 5 to 12. The original proposition was that the council's plan immediately post every election would be allowed to go out before final adoption through to December after the election. So 14 months. There was a lot of negative reaction to that in the submissions that we received, and so the bill that you see today actually has brought that requirement back to the council plan immediately post-election, being in place by the 30th of June, which is essentially status quo with what you have today. And one of the changes that did come about directly as submissions from particularly rural councils actually was the proposition to move budgets out to a 4-year budget to be more aligned around the similar concept to both Commonwealth and state governments. So the bill does foreshadow a requirement of budgets being a 4-year budget. Obviously, it's a 4-year rolling budget, so every year the council has the opportunity to check in on how that's travelling. I said we had so they're just some of the major changes that happened between the original propositions and what is now contained within the bill. We have, as I said, received 190 submissions, and it's by every assessment there is a very strong level of support for the bill. There's only a very low number of submissions which are outright opposed to the bill. A number of submissions might identify an issue here or an issue there, but on balance are generally supportive of the general directions contained within the bill. So we're in the process now of very carefully analysing all those submissions, and thank you very much to all the councils who have taken the opportunity to submit. We're still on track, and the Minister is still hopeful of having legislation, that is the new bill, in Parliament in the first half of this year, and we remain on track as I stand here today to achieve that. So this is a really quite fundamental step forward in terms of contemporising the way the system of local government in Victoria looks, feels and operates for that next generation. The implementation of the bill will be an interesting environment. The implementation will be staggered over 4 tranches of implementation, and the final, so the first of those would kick in January 2019, with every milestone where new provisions come into being. The government has stated that it will allow a 6-month grace period beyond that, so that whilst there'll be plenty of notice about the upcoming requirements, we also don't want to leave councils the opportunity if for a month or two they can't actually make a deadline. So there's a 6-month grace period built into all the different requirements. The last of the implementation would come into being with the next council election. So whilst there are new provisions foreshadowed around elections, particularly around electoral structures, none of those would be impacted, so there'd be transitional arrangements that leaves current arrangements in place through to the election in October 2020. There will be a considerable amount of guidance and regulations required, and we're really keen to heavily engage councils in the development of the guidance. We really do want the sector to actually develop up from with itself and for itself what it regards as best practice. So we will be looking very heavily towards councils to assist in the preparation of guidance material for various elements of implementing the Act. So that's this is a very significant piece of work, of course, and again, I extend our appreciation for many councils who took the opportunity to very actively participate, not just in the most recent round of submissions, but indeed over the last 3 years as we've shaped up these reforms for the future. State budget is rapidly coming upon us, of course. So the state budget will be handed down on the 1st of May. It's interesting. The current year's budget, for the first time, the amount of grants and transfers to local government in a 12-month period exceeded $1 billion. So in 17-18, the current year budget, the grants and transfers, so that's money that flows to local government via the state, tipped the $1 billion mark, so just slightly over $1 billion. So we're obviously the state budget is a really important financial statement, not just for the state, obviously, but for those who depend on it. And if you accept that the local government is a beneficiary to the tune of about $1 billion through the state budget, state government has a real and keen interest in state budget outcomes as well. I'd like to touch very quickly on the parliamentary inquiry into the sustainability and operational challenges of Victoria's rural and regional councils. So this is a parliamentary inquiry. It had a terms of reference given by the Parliament to really look into what are the sustainability and operational challenges of Victoria's rural and regional councils. And most of you will be aware that the inquiry handed down its report on the 27th of March. It is actually a very comprehensive piece of work and very much complements a very significant piece of work that Local Government Victoria oversaw in this last 12 months when we engaged KPMG to do a very deep analysis of the structural and operational challenges that do face the sustainability of rural and regional councils, but importantly, what are some of the options that future governments could consider to address some of these fundamental challenges being faced by those councils. It's interesting, the parliamentary inquiry found very, very similar outcomes to of the work that KPMG has done. The KPMG work has taken it perhaps one step further in terms of proposing a range of options that might be considered by future governments. So the state has 6 months to respond to the parliamentary inquiry report. So the state will hand down its response to the parliamentary inquiry in September of this year. Rural Councils Victoria was a key component of the steering group that we put together to manage the work that we did with KPMG, and I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of Juliana Phelps and Councillor Jenny O'Connor from Indigo Shire, who made a really fundamental and substantial contribution to the steering committee in shaping the work and the direction that KPMG did in developing that work. Turning now to a couple of funding programs that Local Government Victoria has underway that it might be of some keen interest to you. So Local Government Victoria manages a $2.7 million fund that is very specifically aimed at funding to assist rural and regional councils who might want to pursue collaborative arrangements. So some 21 projects have been funded to date. So there's been about 1.24 million has been allocated to rural and regional councils to look at a whole range of innovative initiatives aimed at developing and supporting collaborative engagement. There will be further funding rounds, so there's another $800,000 we'll be looking to allocate in 2018-19, so I'd ask all of you to put that on your radar. It is funding that is there and is specifically available to assist rural and regional councils who might want to work collaborative with neighbours. So it's a funding program that the criteria are quite wide, and we're always willing to sit down with councils who might have a good idea to see whether we can progress through that particular funding program. The other one I would mention is the Libraries Infrastructure Funding Program. So there's $4.5 million available in this next financial year, 2018-19, to assist councils with library infrastructure. So this is if you want to expand or in fact new library infrastructure. We'll be opening up the applications that for those councils you might want to look at, you might have in your budget in fact, some works for libraries next year. We'll be opening this up in the next few weeks, so keep your eye out for that if you're proposing to do something significant with your libraries in the next year or two. Again, $4.5 million available. For small rural councils, that's the 19 small rurals, there is no matched contribution required. So it's 100% funding. So the government's made a conscious decision for the group of 19 small rural councils that that funding program does not require match funding from the councils. So it's certainly quite an attractive package if you're thinking about doing works in your library infrastructure. Can I touch very quickly on recycling? And I just come in on the tail end of Matthew Guy's presentation, and recycling is obviously on everyone's mind at the moment. I won't go over all the history about China's change in policy, etc. But just to flag that Local Government Victoria is managing the $12 million that is being distributed to all councils, and I'm really pleased to say all 79 councils have put their hand up for this funding. It's non-competitive, so the funding will be allocated to you based on your forecast recycling waste expectations for the period 1 March to 30 June. So it's $12 million going directly to the 79 councils. As I said, all councils have expressed an interest. Funding agreements are now out with your administrations. As soon as we can get those back, we can get the money flowing. So for those CEOs who might be in the room, if you haven't, if this is not on your radar, you might ask the question, because the funding is there, it's ready to go, and as soon as we've got funding agreements, we can actually get the money out to you. That funding is based on $60 per tonne, and as I said, it's relevant for the period 1 March for the recycling waste collected in the period 1 March to 30 June 2018. The other thing that we've done as Local Government Victoria is facilitated for those councils who needed it an exemption from tendering requirements, so that you can actually go enter into a renegotiated contract with your existing supplier to keep the system going without the need to actually go out and re-tender. So we had about 60 councils took up that opportunity as well. Just very quickly, a couple of other things. The Local Government Mayoral Advisory Panel. So I'm pleased to say the expressions of interest closed a week or two ago. I'm pleased to say we had 31 mayors put up their hand to be considered for appointment to the Local Government Mayoral Advisory Panel for 2018. So the Mayoral Advisory Panel is a fantastic opportunity for 3 times a year, it'll be this year in 2018, to have a direct conversation with the Minister for Local Government about a whole range of issues relevant to local government. So it's a great opportunity, and thank you to the 31 mayors that have put their hand up to be considered. The Minister is expected to make the announcements in late April or May, and normally the Minister would look to have a spread of mayors from across the state. So we would expect that the appointments, and it's normally up to about 12 are appointed, would normally reflect a spread across the state. The fair go rate system, I can advise that one council has made application to the Essential Services Commission for a rate cap variation for next year, and that's the Monash City Council. 3 councils, of course, have carryover approvals from the current year, but there's one new application process that will be processed by the, one new application that will be processed by the ESC for the 2018-19 financial year. The last one I just wanted to raise very quickly, because this will be, again, Local Government Victoria working very closely with your council over the next few months, and that is the Councils and Emergencies project. So this is a 3-year program where essentially Local Government Victoria is leading a program with the sector to better understand and be clear on what the roles and expectations of local government are in emergency management, so there is a clear level of understanding across the whole emergency management spectrum. That work culminated in a statement of what the responsibilities are. That was produced as a position paper at the end of last year, 2017, and 2018 essentially is using that framework. We'll be working with your councils to understand what your individual capacities are, and if there are gaps, how those gaps might be addressed. So that's, again, a really important piece of work. Local government plays a very important and fundamental role in the end-to-end emergency management spectrum, and it's really important that we're clear on what the expectations of local government are, and that we're even clear on local government's capacity to actually meet those expectations. And if there is a gap, how are we collectively going to address those gaps? So that's that piece of work also is being overseen by a steering committee, and I think we've got about a dozen representatives from various councils that have been appointed to assist that important project over 2018. So Rob, that's just a very quick snapshot of a number of things of Local Government Victoria interests that hopefully are of importance and interest to rural and regional councils.